fits in the sort of grander scheme of things. As I said, we've been doing this for quite a while. We focused on family and private businesses specifically, but we've been working a lot more with corporates and government departments and not-for-profits over the years, because at the end of the day, if you have a company of any description, you need to have effective directors. And as directors, you need to know what you're supposed to be doing. You need to know how to act in the boardroom. And that's why we ultimately developed the Applied Directorship Programme, because we were struggling to find directors who had the right experience to work with us on the boards that we were working with. And our focus is on Africa, but very recently we've expanded into Australia. We've been in Kenya for a couple of years and Ghana for a couple of years. And I'm in the process of working out a partnership with some people in the UK. So very exciting times. I think the message is getting out to the world that there is a better way of doing governance. We see governance mentioned in the newspapers far too often, or governance failure, should I say, mentioned far too often in the newspapers. So let's work together and try and solve that problem. And we're attacking it from the practical aspect. So how can you be more effective in the boardroom rather than just know and understand the theory? So let's get a chance to work out who's in the room. So I'm just going to put a poll up, just tick the box. If it's more than one, great. If it's just the one, click the one. So are you an experienced director? Are you an aspiring director? Are you a next generation director? In other words, you're part of a family business and you are about to move up into that space. You're about to take over the reins from the founder or from the second generation or wherever you are in the sequence. Or are you a CEO, entrepreneur, business founder that's looking to see how they can professionalize their board or change their career, move on to something a little bit more fun and exciting as they move towards retirement, whatever it might be. Let's get an understanding of who we've got in the room. And also then we can frame the stories and we can frame the questions to try and support you. I'll just give you a couple more minutes. Okay, there's a couple of you, just please tick the box. So it looks like we've got a good broad cross-section and no next generation directors. That's a little bit disappointing. I was hoping we'd have a few family members who are seeking guidance on this call, but never mind. So maybe to kick us off, Kieron, what in your experience, having dealt with quite a few of our clients, I know you were head of guide for a while, now you're a managing partner. In your experience, what has been the value of doing this kind of training for companies who are looking to build a more effective board?
Tom, I think that there are probably a number of angles, and coincidentally, we were just chatting about it just before we joined the webinar. But I think one of the biggest challenges most people face when they get into the boardroom or get appointed as a non-executive director is understanding what that means. And when I say understanding what that means, is understanding what's needed, wanted, and expected of you on the one hand, and also understanding what the implications of holding that particular position are. So perhaps if I start off with understanding that sitting as a director on a board means that you have a fiduciary responsibility to that company, and that you can be held personally liable for any decisions that get made on that board or in that board or that affect the company. So that, I think understanding firstly that that's potentially one of the consequences or one of the risks and rewards that sits with sitting as a director on a board, but then also understanding how do I participate best in a board meeting, and how do I protect myself and the company best in that board or on that board. And the whole purpose and the whole foundation behind the Applied Directorship Programme is helping you understand that as a director, what the key governance aspects are that you need to be looking out for, so that the consequence of any personal liability is never an issue, and you can literally sit in that board and make decisions in the best interests of the company, knowing that from a governance point of view, you know what you're talking about, you know what questions to ask, you know what areas to look at specifically. And I think for new and aspiring directors, and perhaps experienced directors alike, knowing that gives me a lot of confidence when I sit in the boardroom, just knowing what I should be looking out for and the kind of questions I should be asking.
Yeah, it was interesting. It's that definitely that confidence makes a difference. And we've seen it with many of the women who've done the course. I think there's definitely a difference in terms of confidence between men and women going into a new situation. So the research indicates that most men will only need sort of 40 or 50% of an understanding of something before they'll give it a go. They'll take the risk. They'll move into the space and see what happens. Whereas women are very much more need very much more confidence, very much more knowledge and understanding before they'll make that step. So what we're really focused on, and we've had quite a large number of women who've done this program, is making sure that if you have the opportunity to be a director, then do the training so that when you walk into the room for that first meeting, you know what it's about. You know what your role is. You know what you're expected to do and how to contribute and what kinds of questions to answer and ask, because it makes such a difference to the value you can add and how quickly you can add value. Because thinking about a board, often boards only meet 4 times a year. That's an awful long time to get a few board meetings under your belt. Whereas the program, the way we've just constructed it, it's a board meeting a month. So by the time you finish the program, you've been through that experience of living and breathing and acting through 8 board meetings, 8 simulated board meetings with real decisions you need to make on a simulated company. So it does make a huge difference. Really does. So for experienced directors, I think what we have also found is that being an experienced director does not necessarily give you the right experience as a director. So there's huge gaps in understanding of the people that we're learning from. So it's a bit like the analogy I use, it's a bit like learning how to drive from your parents. Things have moved on, things have changed, the rules have changed, they've become more sophisticated. If we're learning from someone who hasn't done any training, if at all, or they've just learned from practical experience, we're probably missing quite a big chunk of what we need to know as directors. And it's often difficult to fill that gap just from experience, just from common sense. There's an awful lot that you need to actually read and understand and apply and relearn and apply and relearn. So I mean, I know you've been serving on quite a few boards since you've been with us, Kieron, and we've served on a few boards together. How have you found that being on the ADP, because I know you've done the ADP as well, what difference did that make in terms of, I have experience, now I've done the training, what's the experience going forward?
Yeah, I think just to add to what you were saying there as well, is that so often there's this perception that if I'm going to get appointed to a board or sit on a board, then I need to be a subject matter expert or an industry expert or have in-depth industry knowledge to be able to sit on that board. And for me, what is important, whilst I would certainly never detract from industry experience and subject matter experts and even specific area experts like financial expertise, etc., is that I think if you understand the basic principles of governance that affect any board, regardless of the industry that they sit in, then you can truly come to the table as a non-executive director and add value without having to be a subject matter expert. And so often we find boards filled with CAs and subject matter experts, etc., etc. And whilst, please don't take this the wrong way, I'm certainly not knocking the value of that. Sometimes just having somebody who understands the principles of governance and understands what questions should I be asking in the board to influence the conversation, to influence the decision making, to test the decision making and the thought process that goes behind it. So again, you know, from my personal point of view, I serve on many boards, and most of the boards that I sit on, I'm not a subject matter expert in those particular industries, but with my understanding of those basic governance principles, I think that I'm able to add value and ask relevant and pertinent questions when they're needed.
Yeah, absolutely. And particularly as an independent non-exec director, it can be just the fact that you're not making the same assumptions as the people who've been in the business for a long time. And particularly if you don't clearly understand the nitty-gritty of that particular industry, as part of the learning process and understanding how it works, often you can uncover really long-standing assumptions that people who've been in the business for a long time have been holding, and actually they're not relevant anymore, or actually they're quite dangerous because things have moved on to such an extent that they're now in a potential risk. So just having that completely outside, completely independent, never seen this business before kind of perspective, and asking questions about everything, whether it's reading something or actually asking the question out loud, it's that being inquisitive, checking and the understanding everywhere, digging into the financials, why, all of that kind of investigation, interrogation can often bring up to the surface things which have been long hidden and probably would have never come to the surface before. And just asking one of those difficult questions can actually shift the needle quite substantially. So it's important to be experienced in general business, but it doesn't mean you need to be, as Kieron said, the subject expert in that particular business. Hopefully they've got quite a lot of subject experts in the business already. Otherwise they wouldn't have got to where they've got to in their industry. So it's bringing another perspective, an outside perspective, a different point of view. And we'll talk about a little bit in a minute about a different background, a different way of thinking, a different kind of question or leaning that we have based on our personality profile as well, which we also include in the process and included in the Applied Directorship Programme, because we've seen it to be absolutely critical when building a board. And then for CEOs and entrepreneurs and business founders, particularly if you're in a situation where you've, as a founder, an entrepreneur, your business has grown, now you're getting to the point where you want to maybe get external investment. Now the VC, the private equity or the shareholder that's coming in wants to sit on your board. If you don't have a clear understanding about how a board works, then you're putting yourself at a disadvantage. And the tendency will be for the incoming director, particularly if they've got more experience than you, to start to dominate the process and dominate the conversation, and maybe drive a methodology or drive a direction for the business, which is not necessarily in its best interest. So if you can get up to the level where you can compete and ideally know more than the incoming person about how governance works, it can be massively useful and massively powerful. And for CEOs, if you want to look to move into a non-exec director position somewhere else, I would highly recommend it, because it's by far the best way of learning the difference between what it means to be a director and what it means to be a CEO, because they are very different. And you can then bring that learning back into your organization and apply that learning to your board and hopefully get much better value from your board, because you've now seen it from their perspective. You've seen the problems from a different point of view. And also just understanding the process of how a board meeting should be run, you can then drive it to make sure that your board is actually acting as efficiently and effectively as it possibly could. I don't know if you've got any other points, Kieron, on the particular process. And we've seen some massive improvements just by implementing proper process into boards, how they can be much more effective than they were before.
Yeah, I think what makes a board effective is, first of all, to your point about having the right people sitting around the table, and then secondly, ensuring that there is a rhythm and a cadence to the board meetings, so that they're happening frequently enough. You mentioned a little bit earlier, so often boards are in this meeting cycle of meeting quarterly. And whilst that's the accepted way of doing it, or the traditional way of doing it, my point of view on that is that if I'm sitting on a board every quarter, by the time I'm looking at information that's 3 months old, and in particular financial information, which is always retrospective as opposed to forward looking, unless you're looking at cash flows, You know, making an informed decision on information that's 3 months old doesn't put you in a great position as a business. So rhythm and cadence is important, and then having a methodology that you follow. And again, the ADP is built on the SADAR methodology of what makes effective boards, or what makes a board effective, knowing that you're looking at certain aspects on a regular basis in your calendar, ensures that the rhythm and cadence that you've got bears fruit, and that you get the best out of the people that are sitting around the table. So it would be those three things for me: is right people in the right seats, a rhythm and cadence that works for the business and the business circumstances. And let's face it, the world is changing every single day. What I heard this morning, the rand has slumped to its worst levels in, I don't know how many years, 3 years or something like that, overnight. So, we're in a constantly evolving business environment. And like I say, the last point would be methodology, having a methodology that you follow. And again, sometimes that is one of the vital roles that a non-exec can play on a board, is making sure that the business is looking at things that they might not always be looking at on a regular basis, or issues that they're looking at on a regular basis.
Yep, very much so. Whoops, that's not what I was meant to do. Struggling to get my camera view in the right place. I can see everyone. So one of the things we're trying to equip you to do is to make meaningful strategic decisions. There's a lot of time spent on a robust methodology, which Kieron touched on just now, and increasing awareness and using business acumen to improve the strategic thinking in that group. We also want to help you learn and promote ethical conduct within a boardroom. So make sure that we've built things like a governance, board charter, where we define as a board what are our ethics, what is the sort of rules of engagement of our team as a board, and then how do we leverage boardroom diversity. So I'll talk a little bit about the personality profile, which definitely helps. But we certainly want to be looking at how we leverage different age groups in a boardroom. How do we leverage different backgrounds? There's been a lot of emphasis on color in this country particularly, and that's important, but you need diversity, not all of one and none of the other, regardless of which way around it is. And we also don't want a whole board that all came from the same sort of background and schooling, and in other words, thinks the same way. We want to try and build diversity in terms of different social economic groups as far as we can. Now, it's really difficult in a small board, but it's at least something we need to try and think about. And can we bring people into the boardroom meeting that help us see different perspectives, the different perspectives of our clients, perhaps, that we don't necessarily have represented in the boardroom? And the way we've built the program to include a simulation, the idea is we want to try and get you to actually have a board meeting. Someone want to experience what it's like to be a chairman, going through the agenda, arguing the points with a simulated company. So the company is set up on a manufacturing company simulation platform from the States. So you are running a manufacturing company in your teams, in the cohort, and then getting new financial information each month, which you then need to act on. But as part of that process, you're running a proper board meeting. And then recognizing what it means to be a high performance director. So there's a lot of background information, a lot of videos, lots of reading to do to try and help explain this is the way it works. This is the game we're playing as a director. These are the skills you need to have. This is the awareness you need to have to be high performance. So are there any questions so far? Anything? I see anything in the question box? Still, is chat working yet? I've only got stuff in chat from Serdar. Lashan, you said you can see it, but the chat's still disabled. Any news on that one? Otherwise, we've set everybody to talking permitted, I think. Yes, everyone's set to talking permitted. So if all other technologies are failing, please unmute yourself and ask any questions you have at this point. before I go into the sort of detail of how the program works. All good? Great. So the way...
Tim, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, you couldn't hear me
Edward.
before. I'm just
Hello,
testing
Edward.
if you could hear me now. Okay,
Yes,
now
I
that's
can hear
okay.
you
Thank
now.
you.
I didn't have the right speakers plugged in. That was all my fault.
Perfect.
Thank you, Edward. Mission accomplished, systems working. So the way we built this program was around our, what we call our governance compass. And over the last 14, 15, I think it came out 15, 16 years ago when we first developed this compass. These are all of the segments that we could identify that form part of strategy of a business. And around the outside, you've got the north, south, east, and west of the purpose, and the opposite being sustainability and conformance, and the opposite being whoops, I can't see myself here, performance. Because they put in opposite directions. So if you're driving the purpose of this organization, you can often forget that we actually need to have processes in place. We need to have some way of maintaining quality, et cetera, otherwise we're not going to be sustainable. And then from a monetary perspective, what happens is we drive the performance, we're pushing profit, we're paying dividends like mad. Often what happens, and you see that's typically when companies pop up in the newspapers, they've pushed the performance or they've falsified the performance to keep up what the impression is, and that's what shareholder expectations are, and conformance starts to slip. They start polluting more. They start taking shortcuts. They start using dodgy labor in very poor countries because they want to cut costs so they can keep driving and pushing performance. So as directors, we need to make sure that this circle, this bubble, is kept in balance, is kept in equilibrium. So this diagram is trying to represent lots of different aspects of what it means to be a director, and also what the responsibilities and roles are of being a board and being a director on a board. So the outer ring is that's forces pulling in the four different directions that will distort the business and could cause problems and could eventually cause it to break if one or other is pulling too hard. The bits in the middle is the cycle, the sequence that we've understood and we've tested over years and years and years. If you follow the sequence, the company starts to build really amazing momentum. So if you have a clear idea of where you're going, what is your strategy and direction? So the first board meeting module you have on the program is about strategy and direction of your new little manufacturing company. What's it going to be called? What measurements are you going to be taking to beat the others, to compete against the other cohorts, the other teams in your cohort? Then you move on to organizational culture, because as the phrase goes, organizational or culture eats strategy for breakfast. Because if you don't have a culture that is in alignment with the strategy, then the strategy is just going to go nowhere. It's just not going to happen. So the next thing after devising where it is we're going is making sure we understand the organization culture is actually going to drive that strategy. And if not, what does the culture need to look like to take it forward? And how are we as a board going to move the organization to the point where the culture is integrated with the strategy and they are both moving together smoothly? Now we know where we're going. Now we know what the values and the culture of the organization need to be to get there. Now we can look at whether we have effective leadership to take us there. And that can be really difficult if you are the founder CEO and it becomes really obvious you're not necessarily the right person to be taking the organization forward. There needs to be a different type of leadership at this point in the life cycle of the business in order to move it to the next level. And maybe it's time to move into a different role, maybe to go into much more sales focused role or an innovation and business development role, whatever it might be that you're really good at. The rest of the team starts to become really obvious who the leaders in the different departments are as well. And now you can start to make sure as a board that you're driving that understanding into the organization through the recruitment process, through the definition of the values and making sure that's part of the interview process, making sure that we're measuring and checking the levels of engagement, et cetera, throughout the organization. That's part of the board's monitoring role of the lifeblood of the organization. The next one is stakeholder engagement. So we've got the internal team sorted out. Now we can look outwards. So who are we engaging with? Do we know every stakeholder that's impacted or impacting this organization? So it's an in and an out. Who are they? Who's managing that relationship? How often are they engaging with that relationship? Is it daily, weekly, monthly, annually? Is it an email? Is it a visit? What is it? So is it clients? It's how often we're engaging with our team? How often we engage with our suppliers? How often we're engaging with the industry, with our communities? Everybody is potentially a stakeholder if they have any kind of influence on your performance or are impacted by your performance and what you're doing on the ground. And in some cases, literally what you're doing on the ground, and environment is becoming much more important as well. Then not forgetting shareholder returns. So yes, we've got all this other stuff going on, but if we're not delivering to shareholder returns, then shareholders are going to start to get twitchy and shareholders are going to stop putting more money in. They're going to want to move on, sell shares, close the business, whatever it might be. So a critical part of the role is to understand through a shareholder statement of intent, what do shareholders want? What is the rate of return? What is the capital growth that shareholders want? And again, for a lot of founder-led businesses, there's never been a shareholders meeting where they've thought about what that is. But as soon as you bring non-exec directors into the board, you can start separating those hats and start to think much more clearly about, okay, well, I've invested all this time and money into this business. What am I going to get out of it? Then you move on to risk management and compliance, the typical place of where people think of governance, but as you can see, much bigger and broader than typically thought. Financial results. So what is a suitable set of financials to come to a board meeting? It's not 50 pages of detail. It needs to be summarized. And then everybody in the board meeting needs to know how to read those financials. So we spend a lot of time on helping the attendees of the course understand this is like the minimum requirement if you want to be a director. It's now your fiduciary duty to understand and interrogate the financials, not just leave it up to the financial manager or CFO. And then last but not least, the 10th module of the program is going through and doing an evaluation and improvement process of your little team, your little board. So you get to experience it, go through the questionnaires, answer the questions, get the feedback to see how you did as a board. So we try and make sure that you've done all of these segments and you've experienced all of these segments. You've done the learning in a bite-sized chunks each month based on each of these segments, so that when you get to the end of the course, you're fundamentally thinking differently. You're fundamentally acting differently when you go into a boardroom. And then 11th session, we added after a couple of cohorts, because the feedback was that people wanted a closeout session. They wanted an opportunity to ask the questions of the other teams about how they did, to ask questions that had come up during the course which hadn't been answered, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how we ended up with the 11 months. Any comment on that, Kieron? Any learnings from you doing it? The value of doing month by month by month and trying to break it down into chunks rather than trying to do it in blocks, which typical academic courses do?
No, I think you've covered that very, very well, Tim. I think, you know, one of the best things about the format of ADP is the interactive nature of it, in the sense that you can see almost real time the impact of the decisions that you make. Secondly, it's a safe environment. So if you get it wrong, no one's going to get hurt.
No one's going to lose their job or die in a tragic accident.
Exactly.
Manufacturing plant blows up.
So I think that having the opportunity to be on the training field and get match day fit is absolutely vital and a great component of it. And I think the other aspect is the cross section of people that you'll generally encounter on the ADP. So I remember on the program I was with, there were people from right across Africa, at various levels on boards and organizations, from entrepreneurs to listed entities. So you get to interact with a wide cross-section of individuals, that each of them provide a great learning opportunity and insights and perspectives that come from a different country or a different industry or a different sector of the economy. That's really the benefit of the way that we put it together.
Yeah, and it's a good point that you make about we are living this whole thing of diversity, because there was a lot of pushback. For those of you who don't know, as we came into COVID, we used to run all of these programs as face-to-face in individual cities. So each cohort was a Cape Town cohort, a Nairobi cohort, an Accra cohort. So it was only people from that region that were in the room. When the COVID hit, we had to move everything online immediately. So literally some courses had been three courses were face-to-face, now suddenly they're online. Now, one of the things that definitely got missed was the social aspect. But what we found very quickly was for the new cohorts, the opportunity to have immense diversity in the room was a huge value add, as well as not having to travel and all the rest of it that goes with it. So the fact that you've got someone in your cohort someone from 4 or 5 different or 6 different countries who've got different levels of experience, different types of businesses, it opens up networking opportunities, opens up the opportunity to ask really deep questions about what's going on in that country, particularly since most African businesses are at some point looking to move into another country or another area. And that's just alone built some fantastic relationships that have continued after the courses are finished, and has added massive value. So yes, unfortunately, the social aspect has been lost because of the online delivery mechanism, but I think there's an awful lot of benefit that's come from it as well. And the sessions are not too bad. They're 4 hours. They're broken down into different chunks. So the first hour or so is facilitated to go through the material, introduce you to the material and cover some of the key concepts. Then you've got, I think it's an hour and a half or 2 hours of the board meeting in the middle. And then there's an hour of a closeout session. So again, even online, it's easy to stay focused because there's lots of things going on. You're put into breakout rooms. There's lots of engagement. It's not just a lecture. So even, yeah, as I said, even though it's online, we've managed to maintain the engagement. And a lot of people have commented that they were quite impressed that they had never managed to stay awake for a 4-hour webinar before or online call before, and now they do it every month. So it's one session of 4 hours facilitated every month for 11 months. All of the other materials are online through an education platform. There's videos, there's things you need to read, there's self-reflection exercises, there's all kinds of different modalities of learning that are built into this program. But the only time commitment that's fixed is here's the calendar for the 11 months. These are the dates you need to be there, whether it's a morning cohort or an afternoon cohort. The dates for the whole 11 months are scheduled right at the beginning. Put them in your diary. And as if it was a board meeting, make it happen. Make sure you're there. Make sure you're attending and you've prepared properly, just as if you were a director on a board that was meeting monthly. That's the real, so what hangs it all together. We want to make this as real as we possibly can. And the other component, which is something that's quite unusual in learning programs generally, is we include a profiling tool that we developed a few years ago called Contribution Compass. It's now been farmed off as a separate company because Contribution Compass can be used in all kinds of different contexts. HR departments, you can use it for any team at any level in the organization. We specifically use it for boards. And the idea is it goes back to the core of where most of these, if not all of these, personality profiling tools come from, which is I Ching. So that's I-CHING, if you want to look it up, which is an ancient Chinese philosophy. It's been around for thousands of years, and it tries to describe how life works, how nature works, how energy flows. So we've picked this particular model because we want to understand how individuals contribute to a team. In our case, it's a board. And how does that board contribute and influence the direction of the business? Because a board has a profile too. A team has a profile too. So it's broken down into 4 energies: activating, inspiring, sustaining, and tempering. Everyone has a piece of all of those, but you have more of some than others. And that gives a very distinct personality profile and a way of acting and a way of thinking. And we need to understand that in the boardroom, because in a critical moment, our conscious mind is not necessarily working very effectively. It's our subconscious mind's driving behavior. So we need to know which way those individuals around the room are going to jump. What are they going to most naturally think about? What risks and opportunities are they going to most naturally identify? And we need a team that's looking out in all of the directions, not just one or two, which is very common in most, particularly private and family businesses, because they're your family. So you've brought the people in, either private business, you've brought people in that you're familiar with, that you like, that you get on with, which means they typically have a similar profile to you. And family is the same. It might be the ones who display a particular trait are the ones which are driven through the business. And that means you continue and perpetuate this single sort of track of thinking, whereas it's very powerful at board level if you can have more diversity. So the way it shows up in reality in terms of the individual profiles is there's 8 profiles, and some of them are firmly in a particular energy. For example, activating energy. Catalysts are like a catalyst reaction. You put a catalyst into a situation, they will naturally want to change something, if not everything. So as soon as the change is done, you need to remove them and put them onto the next project. So if you think about founders with a high driving catalyst energy, they're going to get this thing going, but once it's going, it needs to be handed over to someone else to make it, consolidate it, to make sure it's sustainable, to make sure you have an inspired team, etc., etc., and then move on to the next project. If you stay in that reaction too long, it just burns itself out. You need to move a catalyst, just like a chemical reaction, onto the next idea, next project, next whatever it might be. Champion is about shining the light. So the little glyph of a torch, shining the light on something, shining the light on the brand, bringing people like moths to a flame and saying, look, people, look, this is an amazing thing we've got. Buy, come and join us, get excited, get involved. But again, that needs to be handed over to someone else who's then going to make sure that there's the team to deliver it, that we've got consistent engagement with those clients. And that's where the coach profile comes in with that high inspiring energy. Hand over to the next one in the wheel. It's all about flow. It's all about energy flowing in a circle. The coach profile then inspires the team, inspires the clients, brings them in, holds them in, sales, HR, typically in that space. Connector is very good at bringing the people to the things. So it's making sure, in logistics particularly, a lot of connectors end up in logistics because they understand, is this a people problem or is this we just haven't got enough stuff? So how do we bring the two together? How do we sort out those issues? How do we make sure we understand what the person needs and what we can deliver and make sure the two are in alignment? Custodian is operations, process, delivery, making sure things are consistent, not changing things all the time. Catalyst is all about changing things all the time. Custodian is about changing things as little as possible. And there's a huge conflict in teams typically between those two. I know we've got lots of custodians in our COSEC department and lots of activating energy in the rest of the leadership team. So we're always pulling in opposite directions. But that's the point. We need to make sure we've got both. Cultivator uses that sustaining energy, but now starts to look at it from a data perspective. So what is the data telling me about the process? How do I improve the process based on the metrics, what the output, the data that I'm receiving? How do I bring those two together? Conductor is typically in finance because it's data centric. It's facts, cold, hard facts. Show me the data. I don't believe you until you can show me the data. So when making a decision, a conductor will do some research, look for the data, see what they can glean in terms of whether this thing's viable or not, and then bring the idea forward. Inspiring will talk it through with other people and may start the conversation with almost no clue what the answer is, but talking it through with other people, they formulate their idea, they coalesce it to something a little bit more solid. Those approaches are absolutely valid, but they're in conflict with each other, just like the other two with change and no change are in conflict with each other. But we need both in a leadership team. We need all of this energy going on in a leadership team to make sure we don't miss something really important. And the calibrator is very good at taking what the data is telling us and then working out what the next greatest new thing might look like. So they're taking it round the wheel, moving into the next project, give it to the catalyst. Let's go. Let's try and work out how we're going to do this thing. And then you go around again and around again and around again. So the profiles match the strategy, match the governance compass, and each profile, you'll see as you go through the program that particular profiles will engage in particular segments of the program and start to disengage in others. And that's why we do it this way, so that you can start to understand the power of profile and the power of understanding profile in a team. So just quick wrap up. It's made up of, as I said, 4-hour sessions, once a month online, structured 11 modules. You get the Traversing the Avalanche book, which we wrote a few years ago, which covers all of the material actually, and it was really the foundation of us putting this course together in the first place. So we start with a foundational module, discuss the difference between shareholders, directors, and managers. Then we go on to the team stuff. So the contribution compass profile, how do you build your board? And then we build a board. So we take members of the cohort and we build 1, 2, 3, 4 boards out of the people who are in the cohort. And then in module 3, you go into the board meetings and you start to think about the strategy. What is the strategy of this little manufacturing company that we've now got? What is the product we're going to make? We've had examples of solar lamps, baby sleeping bags. I'm not sure what the others are, but just anything and everything. If you can manufacture it, you as a cohort can have it as your manufacturing good. And then you compete against each other. So what is the culture of our little team? Are we going to make sure that we show up? We're going to make sure that we prepare. What are the rules that we're going to play by? And so we go on. Who's going to be the leader? Okay, well, how are we going to work out the roster for who's going to be the chairman? Who's going to be the secretary? And what our other individual roles might be, like keeping an eye on finance, for example. Until you go around and around and come to the 11th module and do the overview. So it's all about incorporating the team aspect, so working in the boardroom, thinking, so some interrogation, some self-reflection, some lots of deep learning and reading and watching that you need to do, some writing, as I said, with self-reflection. So look, listen, write, read back, go through that process, go through that cycle of learning. You've got to do something. So we're actually sitting in the room, we're reading the papers, we're making the notes, we're sharing the meetings. We're actively involved in this process, making the decisions, doing the finance. And then the last piece, I can't see it on my screen. Oops. Sorry. I've got too many little windows open. Yeah, the checklist. So there's a checklist of tick off which things you've done. So part of the process is we want to try and gamify who's on the leaderboard of being the most conscientious student. So who's done all this stuff? So when you've watched the video, you tick it off. When you've done your submission, it gets ticked off. So we can see each month who's done the work. And then at the end, if you decide to do the certified version, then there's a case study you need to write in order to get the points, to get the NQF level 6 credits. So along the way, there will be some checks and some writing needs to happen, but right at the very end, if you've done the certification, decide to do the certification option, then you do a case study on your business, applying the learning that you've gleaned throughout the rest of the course. So any questions? That's pretty much the sum of it. So it's accredited SAQA level 6, you get 10 credits. And I've applied business, sorry, let's get this right. So apply business performance management practices, NQF level 6, there's 10 credits. Then apply concepts and principles relevant to the practical aspects of corporate governance and accountability, NQF level 6, there are 10 credits. So if that's of interest, I know it's particularly of interest to South Africans because you can claim a lot of the cost of that, of the course back from the skills levy. For anyone outside South Africa, it may or may not be valid in your circumstance, it may not be recognized in your particular jurisdiction. So then it's up to you. That's why we made it voluntary. Okay, any questions? I see chat box issues have been resolved. So you can use chat or you can use Q&A, or we can stick up your hand or put a message in chat and we can unmute you. Otherwise, I'm just going to pick on people. Okay, well, I'm still going to start picking on people. Alex, have you got any questions? I know you've downloaded a vast number of our ebooks. Having heard this, have you got any questions?
This is probably going to help me when I do get around to reading them. But yes, no, SIDAR sort of was new to me as of 36 hours ago, but I'm glad that I attended. I think you've laid it out very clearly, and it sounds like an excellent program. In the poll, I ticked the box as an aspiring director, so I'm not really in the space at the moment, but this looks like a great program you have. But no questions, thanks.
Okay, thanks, Alex. And just so you know, we have done programs, we have got clients all over the globe, but as I said, our focus has typically been in Africa. We just saw that we could make a significant difference. We could make a significant, meaningful economic impact, which is our promise within the African continent. And now we're starting to move out again to New Zealand, Australia, and the UK. And I think there'll be some stuff going on in the US quite soon as well, particularly through YPO, if anyone's heard of them, the Young Presidents Organization, and the typical clients that we've been dealing with. So there's a vast cross-section of quite small SMEs to, I think, what is Moanani is multi-billion dollars, I think now. And we were working with a company that sold out to Mr. Price for 1.4 billion Rand 2 years ago. So there's a huge cross-section. This stuff works regardless of the size of your business. And it helps you get to be a bigger business, but it works regardless of the size of your business. Lashan, did you have any questions, any comments, any experience shares maybe, if you've served on boards before?
Hi, Tim. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you. Oh, you've gone again.
Okay. I guess for me, I'm in that aspiring director as well. I've started, I guess, on a non-for-profit. I'm the treasurer at the moment. I've only been very recently, but I guess for myself, I'm quite excited. Like from everything you've said, a lot of the stuff, I guess, it's one thing going to uni and doing an MBA and doing it, but I know for me, it's more that practicality and learning those new perspectives. So what you outlined, it seems quite interesting as well. It's, I guess, even when I started working in banking, the one thing I always was like, if I was working while I was studying, it would have made everything even more interesting. So I think that's what I think this is gonna help me out. What I'm excited about is seeing the practical side of things whilst being in a role that it applies to.
Yes, and that's absolutely critical to understand that there's nothing to stop you applying this as you go. So we've had several clients in the past where they've started a board process at about the same time as they've started the education program. So they're busy implementing it in the real world in their businesses as they're going through the learning. And it's up to you how big a gap between when you study the strategy and when you actually implement it. But it makes a massive difference if you can apply it straight away. And then you can go back to the facilitator and go back to the rest of the cohorts and ask questions. Look, I'm really struggling with this. This didn't really work as well as I thought it would. What am I doing wrong? So you've got a much faster iteration in terms of learning, applying, doing, relearning, unlearning, all of the bits that happen as you move forward and as you grow. So it's really important to try and apply this stuff as quickly as you can. And it does help if you've got an opportunity in the business you're working with to do that, to do exactly that. Anyone, let's say, Priscilla, I'm sort of skipping down the list here. Did you have any questions or any experience shares?
Hi, Tim and everyone. No, I don't have a question at the moment, but I found the program quite interesting. Certainly something to explore going forward. Thank you.
Cool. There's a question in here from Tasneem. How is your course different to others offered in South Africa? As your value proposition that you do applied pragmatic teaching methods. So yes, interesting point. MBA was mentioned just now. we like to see this more like the sort of, you do an MBA to learn how to be a better or have a better understanding of management, and it trains you to potentially be a CEO or an MD. What we're trying to do is similar with, you've got seminars and practical and case studies and things you're working through, but we're focused specifically on making you a better director. So we want to apply the knowledge. We don't want to just teach the knowledge. We found that we are actually, one of the reasons why we've ended up with partnerships in various other parts of the world is because those individuals, and I've just come back from meetings with 2 people in the UK, have been actively looking for something practical in the board space for their members. And they haven't been able to find anything, because pretty much all over the world, the governance training is academic. And particularly in South Africa, it's very much geared towards, what does the Companies Act say? What are the sort of general principles around ethics? Again, important, but it's very much the theory of it with a few examples. Then you've got the King 4. This is how the King 4 principles work, and this is what you need to be aware of. But a lot of people come to us having done particularly IOD courses, and I would recommend you do them, but have come to us after they've done IOD courses and said, that's great, now what? I don't know how to apply this stuff. And that was my journey. I did the IOD courses before I joined SERDAR, and found SERDAR because I was looking for, now what? That's given me a reference point to know all this theory, but I'm really battling to apply this in the business I was running at the time, where I had 14 directors and 8 staff. So what is this board for? You know, it's all shareholder representatives. How do I manage this team of people that I'm really not getting value from? And that's when SERDAR's methodology really made sense and made a huge difference to that business before I left, because we managed to split the hats out. We managed to work out how to build a much more effective board with a much smaller team. We worked out what was my role as a manager, and what should I be reporting to the board, and how, all of those kind of things were the practicalities of running effective board meetings, not just learning and understanding the theory. So I hope that helps, Tasneem. Maybe just want to unmute yourself. Is there anything else you wanted to find out on that topic? Not sure if she's still there. Oh, Gavin, please put the links to the email addresses for the different regions so that people can follow up. Any other questions? Roger. So Roger Kurtze, one of our our main Australian partner. Maybe you can give some insight for these individuals on the call as to what you saw in this program.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Tim. Hopefully you can hear me. I think for me, I mean, obviously I'm on the journey of bringing SERDAR to Australia, but as well going through the Applied Directorship Programme. And I think, as you've spoken now, I think the practical nature of it is something that we don't have here. As you said, a lot of the courses are very academic focused and are very good. But I think it's how do we practically skill ourselves up so when we walk into a boardroom, or even if we're just interacting with a boardroom, you know, you've got those practical skills of how to have conversations, what questions to ask. You know, if you are challenged, how do you take that on? And so I think the skills that you get off this is fantastic, as well as meeting a vast array of people that are different to you and think differently, and that really challenges you on that journey.
Yeah, and that's just meeting like-minded people who are in a similar situation. How often you get a chance to share a room with 10, 15, 20 other directors and actually get a chance to talk in depth about their experiences. And most of the cohorts have at least some variability in terms of experience. So you can learn from the people who have been on boards multiple times, just like those people can understand from someone who's coming into it first time and get their perspective and maybe apply that knowledge next time they start on a new board, because they really didn't understand how little people know coming into the boardroom. You know, you could get much more of a mentoring approach, not sort of rigid, well, this is the way it goes and you must do this and you must deliver that, and because they haven't a clue what you're talking about. So yeah, I think it does make a massive difference, not just the information that's shared on the program, but the people you meet along the way. And as I said, a lot of the cohorts still communicate with each other. Some of them still meet up with each other where they can, or arrange to meet somewhere if they're from a diverse group of nations. So yeah, it's definitely, it has that kind of sort of MBA kind of feel in terms you build friendships, you build a community whilst you're on the program, which I really enjoyed. Anything else? Edward, did you have anything last? We know you can speak.
I definitely can. Thank you, Tim. I think it's a valuable course for one to explore. I had the same question as they've already been raised, so I'm covered at this point in time. Thank you very much.
Okay, cool. So in terms of pricing, we have a standard price of $3,995, but every region ends up with different specials, different pricing, different currencies, different ways of invoicing, so that it either includes VAT or it doesn't include VAT, all of those kind of things, which make quite a big difference to what you ultimately pay. So I'd highly recommend clicking on or sending an email to the email address in the chat box for your region. So Kenya and anyone else in East Africa, Ghana and anyone else in West Africa, Australia, New Zealand, self-explanatory, South Africa, basically anyone in Southern Africa. So if you're Botswana, Namibia, Mozambique, for example, anywhere that fits in that Southern Africa circle, I mean, then please get in touch by just sending an email to southafrica@sodalgrid.com. If you want to get a hold of me directly, if you'd like to have a consult with me directly, I'm happy to talk for at least half an hour, and most of these consults end up rabbiting on for far more than that for free. So if you have any questions, if you really need some guidance, advice before you take the next step, then please give me a shout. The other thing is we have a half-day workshop on the 23rd of May, which covers most of the material in module 1 of the ADP. So it's also a really good way of testing the waters, as it were, finding out, okay, is this for me? Do I really want to go on this journey? Is this really going to add value to me? So if you go to our website, go to the events, look for the board effectiveness workshop, and sign up for the 23rd of May. That's a great way of getting in, as a sort of easing yourself in rather than leaping off the top of the high diving board into the full 11-month program. So yes, please.